Before the theme song even starts, before the boy and the dog, before any of the candy people you know so well, there is a slow shot of a dead world, a gray wasteland, a little rat scurrying to hide inside the cracked shell of a broken television. Undetonated bombs, still sitting half buried in the dirt, waiting on nothing. And then the camera pulls back and up, and the color floods in, and there is Ooo, green and silly and alive, and the song starts, and you forget what you just saw. That is the whole trick of this show in about 6 seconds. It hides a catastrophe under a smile, and dares you to notice. Tonight, we are going to notice. We are going through the lore of Adventure Time slowly, in the dark, all of it. And we are going to sit with what it was quietly trying to teach us the whole time. This is Marcy. So get comfortable, turn the lights down, we will be here a while. And if you have not subscribed yet, it genuinely does help us keep making these. Start with that opening shot, because almost everyone loves it, and almost nobody lets it land. Ooo is Earth. Not a fantasy world that resembles Earth. Not a parallel dimension. It is our own planet, roughly 1,000 years after a nuclear apocalypse the show calls the Mushroom War. And the reason the land is dotted with candy kingdoms and talking animals and wizards is that magic came back into the world after the bombs fell. That is the premise sitting under every single episode. The treehouse Finn and Jake live in, the one that feels like the safest place in all of children's television, is built inside the hollowed body of a dead tree in a ruined world. The princesses rule over the graveyard of us. Here is the part that I did not expect to find when I went looking, and it changes how the whole thing reads. According to the show's own crew, Ooo was not designed to be post-apocalyptic. The ruined Earth idea was not in the original concept at all. Pendleton Ward, the creator, has said it emerged almost by accident while they were making an early episode called Business Time, where Finn and Jake thaw out a group of frozen businessmen from an iceberg. The team looked at those frozen office workers, floating in the ice in their suits, and decided they implied a dead world, a civilization that had ended, and, in Ward's telling, they just ran with it. So the most famous fictional apocalypse in modern cartoons started as a throwaway sight gag about defrosted middle managers. Those same businessmen, by the way, asked to be refrozen and drift back into Iceberg Lake right at the end of that very episode, and their design was lifted straight from a banker in an episode of The Marvelous Misadventures of Flapjack, the earlier Cartoon Network show Ward worked on before this one. So the dead world of Ooo has, floating in its lake, a recycled joke character from a completely different program, silently standing in for everyone who died. I want to be careful here about what is fact and what is reading. That Ooo is post-nuclear Earth is confirmed, stated plainly by the creator, and shown on the map of Ooo, which has a literal blast crater sitting roughly where part of the old world used to be. You will hear fans say the map is shaped like a human corpse, and that is a lovely idea, but it is a fan theory, not something the show ever confirmed, so I will leave it as the thing it is, a guess people like to make. The crater is real. The corpse is a maybe. What I want to draw out of this, the first lesson if you like, is not a sad one, even though it starts in a graveyard. The genius of Adventure Time is that it refuses to treat the ruin as the point. The bombs are in the ground, and the businessmen are frozen in the lake, and on top of all of it, a boy is having the best day of his life with his dog. The show is not saying the catastrophe does not matter. It buried it in the opening frames on purpose so that it would always be there under your feet. What it is saying, and it says this more and more clearly as the seasons go on, is that joy is something you build on top of ruin, knowingly, because the ruin is not going anywhere and you still have to live. The Candy Kingdom does not exist because the war was undone. It exists because someone decided to make something sweet in the crater. That is a harder and warmer idea than most cartoons ever try for, and it is right there in the first 6 seconds, in a rat hiding inside a broken TV. And the way the show keeps that idea honest is by never fully cleaning up the wreckage. Little pieces of the old dead world keep surfacing in the background for 10 seasons, if you know to look. Rusted cars, a ruined city half sunk in a lake, half a highway going nowhere. The occasional human artifact that the candy people treat as a mysterious relic, because to them, it is one. There is a whole texture of loss painted into the scenery by the background artists, without comment, and it is one of the reasons the world feels so much older and sadder than the plots would suggest. You are always standing in a museum of the end of the world, and the show trusts you to feel it without ever stopping to explain it. The man most responsible for that feeling is a background designer who went by the name Ghost Shrimp. His real name is Daniel James, and he defined the look of Ooo more than almost anyone. The shape of the trees, the crooked mountains, the specific way the land looks handmade and lonely and inviting all at once. The tree fort itself, that beloved treehouse, was reportedly influenced by a cabin Ghost Shrimp built by hand somewhere in the mountains. So the safest home in the show is modeled on a real place, a real artist, built with his own hands in the woods, which is a very Adventure Time fact, the kind where the fiction and the life behind it rhyme. The art director Nick Jennings, who oversaw the look of those backgrounds, is said to have won an Emmy for his production design work on the show. And if you want to see the fullest version of that world on paper, there is an art book, The Art of Ooo, put together by Chris McDonnell, with a foreword written by Guillermo del Toro, who understood better than most that a monster and a fairy tale are usually the same thing seen from two sides. So that is where we begin. A ruined Earth that the makers found by accident, dressed up in candy by hand, with the wreckage of us painted softly into every frame, and a show that decided the correct response to standing in a graveyard is to go on an adventure anyway. Hold on to that, because everything sad that follows, and a lot of it is sad, is happening on top of that same buried ground. The people we are about to meet are not sad because the world is cruel. They are trying to be happy in a world that already ended once, which is, if you think about it, exactly what all of us are doing all the time. We just do not usually get to see the bombs in the dirt. That this is about you properly to the man in the crown, because he is the reason a lot of people cry about a cartoon they were told was for children. When you first meet the Ice King, he is a joke. He is a blue-skinned wizard with a long white beard and a pointed magic crown, and his entire personality is that he keeps kidnapping princesses in the hope that one of them will marry him, and he is bad at it, and Finn and Jake beat him up and go home. For a season or so, that is all he is, a nuisance, a punchline with ice powers. The show lets you laugh at him and feel nothing, and then, very slowly, it takes the joke apart in front of you. The Ice King's real name is Simon Petrikov. Before the Mushroom War, he was a human being, an antiquarian, a man who studied and collected old and strange objects. In Scandinavia, he bought a crown from a dock worker, a peculiar magical ice crown, and when he put it on, it gave him power over ice and snow. It also began, from the very first time he wore it, to erase him. Not his memory in a tidy movie way, his mind, his self. The person named Simon started to dissolve, thought by thought, replaced by the cold thing the crown wanted him to be, and he could feel it happening and could not stop, because he needed the power the crown gave him, and the power was the disease. I want to be exact about the saddest part of this, because the show is exact about it, and a lot of retellings get it wrong. Simon did not have a calm, lucid, heroic moment where he told his fiancée to leave him for her own good. It did not happen that way. The very first time the crown took hold of him, it dominated him completely, and he chased the woman he loved through their home, firing ice, no longer knowing who she was, calling out for his princess. It was that, the terror of watching the man she loved vanish behind a stranger's eyes, that drove her away. There was no gentle goodbye. There was a woman running from a monster wearing her fiancé's face. Keep her in mind. Her name is Betty, and we will come back to her, because her story is one of the hardest in the whole show. The name they chose for him is not an accident either. Petrikov is a constructed Russian-style name, the possessive ending on a diminutive of Peter, so it reads roughly as descended from Little Peter, an ordinary man's name given weight. And Simon is Hebrew, and it means, of all things, he has heard. He has heard. A name that means listening, given to a man who is slowly losing the ability to remember anything he was ever told. The people naming these characters were not being careless. What the show does with Simon over the following seasons is, to me, one of the bravest things any children's program has ever attempted. It reveals, gradually, that the Ice King's decline is patterned on dementia, on the specific, real, slow erosion of a person by a disease that takes the memory first and the self right after. There is an episode in the 4th season, I Remember You, that fans and writers alike have read for years as an allegory for Alzheimer's, and it is the episode where the joke and the tragedy finally stand in the same room. In it, the Ice King, this silly kidnapping wizard, does not know that he and Marceline the vampire, one of the show's most important characters, have a shared past that goes back 1,000 years. He does not remember that he once cared for her. She remembers everything. And here is the detail that I think is the single most quietly devastating thing in the entire series. And it is true, not a reading. In that episode, the two of them sing a song together, and the lyrics of that song are assembled out of real letters. Letters that Simon wrote to a young Marceline long ago as he felt his mind slipping away from him, trying to apologize in advance for the person he knew he was going to become. He wrote to her while he could still write, to say sorry for the monster he could feel arriving. And in the episode, the terrible thing, the thing that got me the first time, and gets me every time since, is that when the Ice King reads those letters aloud, he does not understand them. He wrote them. They are his own words, his own love, his own grief, and he no longer recognizes them. He is performing his own goodbye, without knowing it is his. Marceline knows. She has to stand there and hear the man read the letter he does not remember writing to the child she used to be. That song was written by Rebecca Sugar, a storyboard artist on the show, who would later leave to create Steven Universe, and we will talk much more about her later, because she wrote most of the moments in this series that people cannot get through without stopping. The lesson people usually pull out of Simon is about love, and it is the right one, but I want to say it carefully so it does not come out as a greeting card. The show is not saying that love conquers the disease. It very pointedly does not. Simon does not get better because Marceline loves him. The crown keeps taking him. What the show is saying, and this is a much harder and truer thing, is that you can love someone all the way through the disappearing. That you can keep sitting beside a person as they forget your name, not because it will fix them, but because the sitting beside is itself the whole of what love is, once you strip away everything convenient about it. Marceline does not stay with the Ice King because he is still Simon. She stays because he was, and because being loved should not depend on your ability to remember that you are. There is a real-world echo in the casting that makes it land even harder, at least for me. The Ice King is voiced by Tom Kenny, and Tom Kenny is also the voice of SpongeBob SquarePants, which means the actor holding this slow dementia tragedy in his hands is the same actor responsible for one of the most joyfully idiotic voices in the history of the medium. He can do the laugh and the loss with the same instrument. He is a celebrated veteran of the voice acting world with a long career behind him, and the Ice King is, I would argue, the finest thing he ever did with the sad half of that range, taking a character who was built to be comic relief and carrying him all the way down into genuine grief without ever quite losing the silliness, because Simon, even broken, is still a little silly, and that is what makes it unbearable. A tragedy that has forgotten it is a tragedy is somehow worse than one that knows. The show never lets you go back to laughing at him the easy way. Once you know that the crown is a disease and Simon is its victim, the early episodes change underneath you. Every time the Ice King kidnaps a princess in those first seasons, muttering about wanting someone to love him, you are watching a sick and lonely old man reaching, clumsily and wrongly, for the woman he lost before you were born, without knowing that is what he is doing. The kidnappings were always about Betty. He just could not remember her name. That is the thing this show does again and again, and it is why we are here tonight. It hands you a joke, lets you laugh, and then, a season or two later, gently tells you what the joke was actually about, and trusts you to sit with the fact that you laughed. To understand why Marceline stays with a man who cannot remember her, you have to go back to the worst part of Simon's story, the stretch that happens right after the bombs. There is an episode in the 5th season called Simon and Marcy, and it is, for my money, one of the 2 or 3 finest things the show ever produced, and it is, almost unbearably sad in a way that sneaks up on you. It shows the time long ago, in the immediate aftermath of the Mushroom War, when Simon was not yet fully the Ice King, still mostly himself, still able to fight the crown for hours at a stretch, and when Marceline was a small child, orphaned and alone in a poisoned, monster-haunted wasteland. Simon found her and took care of her. An old, sick, disappearing man and a frightened little half-demon girl, walking together through the end of the world. The way he holds himself together, in that episode, is by singing. Specifically, he sings the theme from the old sitcom Cheers, the one that goes on about wanting to go where everybody knows your name. He sings it over and over, this jaunty little tune about a warm bar full of friends, while the two of them pick their way through the rubble of a civilization that no longer has any bars or any friends or anybody left who knows anyone's name. It is the most human thing in the world, and it will take the wind out of you. He clings to that stupid, cheerful song because it is a rope back to the person he used to be, and because it keeps the little girl calm, and because as long as he is singing, he is still Simon and not yet the crown. And when the danger gets bad enough, when he has to protect her, he puts the crown on and uses its power, and every time he does, it takes a little more of him, permanently, and he knows it, and he does it anyway, because she is worth more to him than his own mind. That is the trade at the center of the episode. He spends himself, thought by thought, to keep her alive. Now here is the behind-the-scenes fact that makes this one even stranger and sadder, and it is one of my favorite pieces of trivia about the entire series. The episode you see is not the episode they wrote. In the original version, young Marceline was not just frightened, she was gravely, dangerously ill, and the whole plot was Simon searching the ruined world for medicine to save a dying child. Cartoon Network looked at that and decided a small child dying of illness was too scary and too dark for the audience, and asked for it to be changed. But the change came late, after the episode had already been storyboarded and drawn, so the crew could not rebuild it from scratch. Instead, they did a kind of last-minute find and replace. The medicine became soup. Marceline is not deathly ill anymore. She is just hungry, and Simon is looking for soup. Except the artwork was already finished, so if you watch closely, you can see the seams of the original, darker story poking through. There is a building clearly drawn as a drugstore that the episode insists is a soup shop, a soupery. There is a vehicle that is very obviously an ambulance, redrawn and relabeled as a clambulance. The dying child version of the episode is still there, underneath, showing through the paint, exactly like the mushroom war shows through the candy. This detail comes from one of the storyboard artists, Cole Sanchez, who talked about it publicly, and once you know it, you cannot unsee it. The pitch the crew reportedly used to sell the network on the episode in the first place was, and I love this, the road, except for kids. They wanted to make Cormac McCarthy's nuclear misery novel for 8-year-olds, and they very nearly did. I think this is worth stopping on, because it tells you something about how this show got made, that is itself a kind of lesson. The darkness in Adventure Time was not an accident, and it was not edgy for its own sake. The crew kept trying to go to genuinely hard places. A dying child, a man losing his mind, the end of the world, and the network kept, understandably, pulling them back towards something safer. And the show that exists is the compromise between those two forces. And the compromise is somehow better than either extreme would have been. A show that got to be as bleak as it wanted would have been unwatchable for a child. A show that was never allowed to be sad at all would have been forgettable. What we got instead is a show where the bleakness is always there, but always slightly hidden, always showing through the paint, a drugstore insisting it is a soup shop, and that tension is the exact texture of the whole thing. The sadness you feel watching Adventure Time is partly the sadness of a crew straining against a leash, and you can feel the strain, and the strain is beautiful. The lesson I take from Simon and Marcy, though, is about caregiving, and it is not a comfortable one. We tell a very clean story in our culture about what it means to take care of someone. We imagine it as noble and warm and rewarding. This episode says something truer and harder. It says that real caregiving often costs the caregiver something they do not get back. Simon does not emerge from those years a better, stronger man. He emerges as the Ice King, hollowed out, his self spent like currency on someone else's survival. He gave her his mind, not metaphorically, literally, a piece at a time. And the show does not pretend this was a fair trade or a happy one. It just insists that he would make it again. That is what love looks like when you take away the part where it rewards you. It is a man singing a sitcom theme to a scared child while he forgets his own name to keep her warm. And there is a grace note to it that I never get over. Years later, when Marceline is grown and Simon is long gone inside the Ice King, the thing that occasionally, briefly, brings a flicker of the old Simon back to the surface is exactly that connection, the shared history, the songs, the child he saved. She becomes, in a sense, the last place he is still stored. He kept her alive with his memory, and then, when his memory failed, she kept him alive with hers. She holds the version of him he can no longer reach. That is what the small girl in the wasteland grows up to be. the keeper of a man who spent himself to keep her. If you have ever been the one who remembers a person that the person can no longer remember being, you already understand this episode better than any recap could tell you. The soup was always medicine. It was just wearing a different label so the children would not be too afraid. Marceline deserves a chapter of her own, because she is the character the whole show is secretly built around, the one who was there before everyone and will be there after. When she first floats into the story, in an early episode called Evicted, she is played almost like a villain. She has gray skin, 2 little fang marks on her neck, she flies, she pranks Finn and Jake, she wants her house back, and her weapon, the thing people always get slightly wrong, is not a guitar, it is an axe. Specifically, it is an electric bass shaped like a battle axe, the instrument fans nicknamed the Axe Bass, and she plays it and she fights with it, and the fact that her most iconic object is both a musical instrument and a weapon tells you almost everything about her before she opens her mouth. Because Marceline is roughly 1,000 years old, and I say roughly on purpose, because the show itself is not tidy about her age or her origins, and I would rather be honest about that than pretend to a precision the writers never had. She is the daughter of a human mother, a woman named Elise, and a demon father, Hunson Abadir, who rules a hellish dimension called the Nightosphere. She lived through the Mushroom War as a child, was cared for by Simon as we have already talked about, and then kept living, and living, and living, for 1,000 years, through the founding of every kingdom in Ooo, watching friends and lovers and whole civilizations rise up and wear out and vanish, while she stayed exactly as she was. Now, I want to correct something gently, because it is a mistake people make constantly with Marceline, and it actually misses the point of her. People say she is the girl who outlived everyone she ever loved. It is a beautiful line, and it is not true. She lost an enormous amount over those centuries. Her mother, Simon, for a very long time. Friends beyond counting, yes. But by the end of the series, she is not alone. Simon is cured and human and standing right there. Bonnibel, the woman she loves, is alive and with her. The people she was most afraid of losing, she does not lose. And I think that actually matters, because the easy version of Marceline is a tragedy about immortality, the vampire doomed to bury everyone, and the show is more generous than that. Her story is not that everyone leaves, it is that some people, if you are brave enough to let them close, stay. The lesson the show hangs on her is impermanence, and it delivers it, of course, through a song. In the 7th season there is a mini-series called Stakes, all about Marceline, and in it her mother Elise sings a lullaby called Everything Stays. The heart of it is a small paradox. Everything stays right where you left it, the song says. Everything stays, but it still changes. And that is the whole philosophy of the character, folded into 2 lines. Nothing is truly lost, but nothing holds its shape either. The people you love do not vanish, but they do not stay the same, and neither do you, and neither does the feeling. It was, as it happens, the first song Rebecca Sugar wrote for the show after she had left to go make Steven Universe, which means she came back to this world specifically to write a lullaby for the one character who never dies, about how everything changes anyway. Even her return to the show enacts the song. She left, and she came back, and it was the same, and it was different. There is a family fact buried in Marceline that is one of the loveliest things I know about how this show was cast, and it is one of those details that once you learn it, you hear the whole relationship differently. Marceline is voiced by Olivia Olson, who sings all of Marceline's songs herself, and who some of you will recognize as the little girl from the film Love Actually, the one who sang the big Mariah Carey number at the school concert, which means one of the most emotionally raw voices in this cartoon belonged to a child star before it belonged to a vampire. And her father, Marceline's demon dad Hunson Abadir, the ruler of the Nightosphere, is voiced by a man named Martin Olson. Martin Olson is Olivia Olson's real-life father. A real father and daughter play a demon father and daughter. So when Marceline and Hunson have their strained, wounded, complicated scenes about a parent who was never quite there in the way the child needed, about a dad who cares in his own broken way, but cannot get the shape of it right, those are 2 people who actually love each other in real life, performing the fictional version of the exact bond they share. The name they gave the demon father, Hunson Abadir, has its own strange history. According to the crew, the first name Hunson was what a storyboard artist's brother used to call the family car when they were kids, and the surname Abadir echoes Abaddon, the biblical angel of destruction, the ruler of the pit. A childhood nickname for a car, welded to the name of a destroying angel. That is how this show built its underworld. The design of Marceline came together the same way, through a chain of hands, which is worth knowing because people tend to imagine iconic characters springing whole from one mind. By some accounts, Pendleton Ward based her partly on a goth friend of his, and the name is said to echo someone from his own life. Ward did the first sketch of her. An artist named Phil Reinda refined the design, and another artist, Natasha Allegri, designed the dress she wears. So the Vampire Queen is a goth girl Ward knew, filtered through 3 artists, wearing a dress a 4th person drew. Nobody makes anything alone on this show, which is going to become a whole theme by the time we get to how it was written. What I keep coming back to, with Marceline, is that she is the show's argument against a certain kind of despair. If you live long enough, the fear goes, you will lose everything and everyone, so why let anyone in at all? Why not stay behind the fangs and the pranks and the, it is my house, give it back? Marceline spends 1,000 years half believing that, guarding herself, playing the villain, keeping the axe between her and the world. And the show's answer, delivered patiently across 10 seasons, is that the guarding does not actually protect you from the loss, it just protects you from the love, and the love is the only part that was ever worth having. She lets Simon back in, she lets Bonnibel back in, and at the end she is not the last survivor of a dead world. She is a woman with people. Everything stays, but it still changes, and the change she chose was to stop being alone. If Marceline is the show's argument against despair, Princess Bubblegum is its argument about power, and she is a far more uncomfortable character than the pink in the crown let on. Bonnibel Bubblegum rules the Candy Kingdom, a nation of living candy people, and she made most of them herself. She is not a princess in the fairy tale sense of a girl waiting to be rescued. She is a scientist and a monarch, centuries old, made of candy biomass, who built her entire kingdom and its citizens out of her own body and her own will. And the show is remarkably clear-eyed about what that makes her, which is, at times, a benevolent dictator. She surveils her people. She experiments on them. She rewrites them when they malfunction. She makes hard, cold, unilateral decisions for what she has decided is their own good. And she is very often right, and being right does not make it any less frightening. Here is a small detail I love. There is a story, repeated among fans, that Bubblegum was very nearly named something else entirely. The story goes that Ward moved her away from a name that carried personal weight for him, though the details are hard to pin down now. In the show, Marceline is the only one who ever calls her Bonnie, that shortened, intimate version of her name, and some fans hear a personal echo in it. A tiny thing, but it is the kind of tiny thing that reminds you these characters were built out of the actual lives of the people making them. The knot at the center of Bubblegum's story is her family, and I have to be careful telling this part, because it is one of the most commonly garbled pieces of Adventure Time lore, and I have watched people get it backwards. Late in the series, we learn that Bonnibel has relatives. There is her uncle, Gumbald, who wanted the kingdom for himself and conspired against her. And there is her brother, Nettie, who is not, as people sometimes say, a shy tree creature. Nettie is a gum dragon, a nervous, easily frightened being with small bat-like wings and a tail, who feeds on the roots of a candy tree, and Bonnibel keeps him hidden and safe in a sanctuary she built for him, because he cannot cope with the world and she loves him. So part of why the kingdom is the way it is, tightly controlled, heavily defended, is that its ruler is also secretly a big sister, protecting a fragile sibling who could never survive out in the open. And the thing with Gumbald, the transformation, gets mangled almost every time, so let me lay it out the way it actually happened, because the truth is better than the mix-up. There is a substance sometimes called dum-dum juice, and people love to say that Bubblegum invented it and used it to wipe her uncle's mind. That is wrong, and it is wrong in a way that matters, because it makes her more of a villain than she is. The juice was Gumbald's own invention. He was the one who used it, tricking 2 of his fellow conspirators into drinking it and turning them into simple, memory-wiped candy folk. And when he came for Bonnibel, trying to force her to drink it too, threatening her, she defended herself. She shot the beaker he was holding with a little pea shooter, and the juice splashed back onto Gumbald himself, and it was his own weapon that erased his own mind and turned him into a harmless candy citizen. She did not coldly lobotomize her family. She knocked a poison out of an attacker's hand and it splashed on him. The show is careful about that distinction, and I think it is worth being careful about too, because the whole question of Bubblegum is exactly how much of her hardness is cruelty and how much of it is a person defending the thing she built. And getting the beaker scene right is the difference between those two readings. Her first real failure, the one the show keeps circling back to, is lemon grab. Early on, Bubblegum tries to create an heir, a candy person to rule in her place, and she gets it wrong. And what she makes is the Earl of Lemon Grab, a shrieking, sour, socially broken creature who does not fit anywhere and cannot be loved and knows it. And here the show does something merciless. It does not let Lemon Grab just be a monster. In an episode called You Made Me, Lemon Grab, all rage and cruelty and unbearable volume, finally cracks open, and what is inside is not evil, it is loneliness. Crushing, formless loneliness, and the specific grief of a creature who understands that the person who made him, his mother in every sense that counts, finds him repellent and does not want him. He wails the title at her. You made me. You made me this way and then you turned away from what you made. It is one of the show's clearest statements of a thing it believes all the way down, which is that cruelty is very often just pain that was never allowed to heal. Lemon grab is what happens when you create a life and then cannot bear to look at it. I should be precise about the body horror that grows out of lemon grab, because it is another thing people scramble. It is not that lemon grab absorbs the candy people into himself as some kind of blob. What actually happens is stranger and sadder and more specific. Out of guilt, Bubblegum makes a second lemon grab so the first will not be alone, and the two of them, left to their own devices, start overproducing lemon citizens using her candy life formula until it collapses into a single grotesque giant, a sprawling lemon body called Lemon John, whose organs end up spread through separate rooms of a castle. And later, in an episode called Too Old, the original lemon grab, twisted by power, actually eats and absorbs his own duplicate, the second lemon grab, the companion Bubblegum made to comfort him. He devours the cure she gave him for his loneliness. The horror is not that he consumes strangers. It is that he consumes the one thing made specifically to keep him from being alone, and is more alone afterward. If you wanted a single image for how untreated pain metastasizes, it is hard to do better than a lonely creature eating the friend that was built to save him. There is a nice piece of casting hiding in this branch of the family too. Gumball, in his final harmless form, is voiced by Mark Hamill, Luke Skywalker himself, who has spent the back half of his career becoming one of the great animation villains, and Bubblegum herself is voiced by Hynden Walsh, who is also the voice of Starfire in Teen Titans, which means the same actor plays the sunniest superhero on one network and this steel-spined candy autocrat on another. The lesson in Bubblegum is the hardest one in the show to sit with cleanly, because it does not resolve into anything comfortable. She is proof that you can love people and control them at the same time, and that the loving does not cancel out the controlling. She truly cares for her citizens, and she also treats them as extensions of her will. She protects her brother, and she also decides, alone, what protection means. The show does not condemn her, and it does not excuse her. It just watches her carry the weight of having made a world and being responsible for it, and it lets you feel how that weight would slowly turn a warm person into a guarded one. Anyone who has ever been the responsible one, the one who has to make the call, the one everyone relies on and quietly resents, understands Princess Bubblegum. She is what happens when caring becomes a job you can never put down. Which brings us to the two of them together, Marceline and Bubblegum, the relationship fans call Bubbline, and the long, strange, sideways way it became one of the most improbably historic love stories in the history of children's animation. For most of the show's run, the romance between these two women is never stated outright. It is worn like a shirt. It is in the way they argue, the way they avoid each other, the specific bruised tenderness of two people who clearly have a history and will not say what it was. And I mean the shirt thing literally, because there is an actual shirt, and the shirt is the whole relationship in one object, and people get its story backwards constantly, so let me set it straight. In a third season episode called What Was Missing, Marceline gives Bubblegum a rock band t-shirt. It is Marceline's shirt, and she gives it to Bonnabelle. And then, sometime later, in an episode called Sky Witch, we see Bubblegum again, and she is still wearing that same t-shirt, treasuring it, keeping it close. There is a moment where she lifts it to her face and breathes it in. And in that same episode, to get back a stolen music box that matters to her, she has to give the shirt up, sacrifice the one object that carries Marceline's scent and memory. The ownership runs from Marceline to Bubblegum, the girl who left the shirt behind, and the girl who kept it and smelled it and finally, painfully, let it go. That is a love story told entirely through a piece of clothing, in a show that was not allowed to say the word love out loud about these two, and it is more eloquent than most shows manage when they are allowed to say anything they want. The reason they could not say it out loud is a real-world story, and it is not a happy one. Adventure Time aired all over the world, in a very large number of countries, and in a number of them, any suggestion of a same-sex relationship was either forbidden by the network or outright illegal under local law. So the crew who wanted to tell this story were working against a hard ceiling. The actress who voices Marceline, Olivia Olson, said as much, out loud, at a book signing around 2014 for an Adventure Time encyclopedia her father had written. She said that Bubblegum and Marceline had dated, that Pendleton Ward had told her so, and that the show could not explore it deeply because it aired in countries where being gay was illegal. Tom Kenny, the voice of the Ice King, was there and chimed in with the reminder that it had been illegal in parts of the United States itself until very recently. Now, I want to be honest and careful here, because Olsen herself later muddied it. She posted, and then deleted, a comment about how she likes to make things up at panels, so her statement is best understood as her recollection of what she was told, not an official studio decree. But the fact that a voice actress felt she had to almost smuggle the truth out at a bookstore, and then half took it back, tells you everything about the box the show was operating inside. And you can watch the crew smuggling it in through the songs. In What Was Missing, Rebecca Sugar wrote Marceline a song called I'm Just Your Problem, and she has said she drew it from a painful, real relationship of her own, and thought of the episode as being about honesty. The song is Marceline, raw and defensive, singing at Bubblegum about how she is sorry she is just a problem for her, and the ex's reading is impossible to miss. There is even a moment in that song where Marceline starts to go somewhere too intimate, singing about wanting to drink the red from Bonnabelle's big pretty face, and Bubblegum cuts her off, tells her that is too distasteful, and the song self-censors, right there in the lyric, a character interrupting another character before she can say the vulnerable thing. The show wrote its own muzzle into the music. That is either heartbreaking or brilliant depending on the day, and I think it is both. Then comes the finale, and the single act of quiet defiance that I think is the best behind-the-scenes fact in the entire series. When the show was ending, the outline for the last episode, the skeleton the storyboard artists work from, did not say that Bubblegum and Marceline kiss. It said, and this is the whole instruction, that they have a moment, that is all. Have a moment. A vague little placeholder that a nervous production could have interpreted as a hug, a look, a hand squeeze, anything deniable. But the storyboard artist assigned to that scene, a woman named Hannah K. Nystrom, drew it as a kiss. A real, unambiguous, on-the-mouth kiss between two women, in a Cartoon Network show, in the finale, canon, undeniable. And according to the showrunner, Adam Muto, who talked about this afterward, Nystrom left a margin note next to that kiss that was 2 words and a giant exclamation mark. Come on, with an exclamation point, as if to say, we have been circling this for 8 years. We have hidden it in shirts and songs and silences. The show is ending. There is no next season to protect. Come on, let them. And they did. The kiss stayed, and it mattered, in a way that is easy to underrate now, and was not small then. Because of it, the kiss was cut in a number of countries. The show had reportedly already been banned in Kenya for being, in the authorities' words, pro-gay. Even a small earlier moment, Marceline spitting on Bubblegum's shirt in that same What Was Missing episode, had been trimmed out in the United Kingdom for being too crude. The romance had been fought over, frame by frame, in edit suites all around the world for years, and in the end a single storyboard artist, drawing a scene a vague outline let her interpret, decided the fight was over, and drew the truth. The show explored it more fully later, after it was off Cartoon Network, in a Distant Lands special called Obsidian, which finally gave Marceline and Bubblegum their full history, the young love and the young breakup and the long road back. But the moment that broke the ceiling was that finale kiss, and the ceiling was broken by a person who wrote "Come on" in the margin. The lesson here is about honesty, and it is bigger than the specific romance, though the specific romance is what makes it land. What the whole Bubbline arc dramatizes, across 8 years and a shirt and a muzzled song and a 2-word margin note, is the cost of not being allowed to say the true thing, and the quiet heroism of finding a way to say it anyway. These two characters spend most of the show hurting each other because they cannot be direct, guarding and sniping and leaving shirts behind instead of speaking. And the show is honest that the guarding causes real pain, and the resolution is not that the world suddenly became safe for them. The kiss got cut in Kenya. The resolution is that they decided to be true regardless, and that someone behind the camera decided the same thing on their behalf. Say the true thing, even in the margin. Even if they cut it somewhere, somebody who needs it will see it uncut. We have gone a long way without really talking about the boy the show is named around. So let us sit with Finn, because Finn is the load-bearing wall under all of it. Everything we have talked about, the dementia and the immortality and the power and the hidden romance, those are the adult tragedies happening in the background of what is, on its surface, the story of a kid growing up. Adventure Time is, at bottom, a coming-of-age story. It follows Finn from a bright, uncomplicated little boy who just wants to help people and fight bad guys and be a hero, all the way to a young man tangled up in love and loss and self-doubt and the hard discovery that being good is more complicated than being brave. The show ages with him on purpose, and I mean that almost literally, because of one of my favorite production decisions in the whole series. Finn is voiced by an actor named Jeremy Shada, who auditioned for the part when he was 12 years old. And as the show went on for years and years, Shada did what 12-year-old boys do, which is grow up, and his voice began to change, to deepen, to break, the way every boy's does. And a normal production would have recast him, brought in a new, younger-sounding actor to keep Finn sounding like a child. Ward decided not to. He let Finn's voice age along with Shada's, from a boy just entering his teens to a young man years later, so that you can actually hear Finn growing up across the seasons, hear the voice deepen in real time, because it was a real boy really growing up inside the role. It is almost documentary. The maturation of the character is not performed, it is recorded. The cracking voice is a real cracking voice. Now, the thing everyone thinks they know about Finn is that he is the last human being alive, the one boy in a world of candy people and talking animals. And that is the emotional impression the early seasons give, the lonely little human. But it is not literally true, and the show goes out of its way later to say so. Finn is not the last human. He was born on a place called Hub Island, one of a chain of islands far out beyond the shores of Ooo, where other humans survived the Mushroom War and went on living, hidden away from the strange magical continent. So the loneliness of being the only human turns out to be a kind of orphan's loneliness rather than a biological fact, which is worse, honestly, because it means the people like him were out there the whole time and simply were not with him. Which takes us to his father, and to the episode that I think permanently changed what kind of show Adventure Time was allowed to be. Finn's father is a man named Martin Mertens, a con man, a charming, slippery, fundamentally selfish man, and for a long time Finn does not know him at all, does not even know if he is alive. And the show builds up years of longing around this absent father, this hole in the boy, before it finally delivers the reunion in a 6th season episode called Escape from the Citadel. And what Finn gets, after all that yearning, is one of the most casually brutal things the show ever did to him. He finds his father, and his father does not particularly care. Martin barely remembers abandoning him. He gives hollow non-answers, deflects, makes excuses, treats the son he left like an inconvenience that has caught up with him. There is no tearful embrace, no explanation that makes the years of absence make sense. There is just a charming, evasive man who cannot or will not give the boy the one thing he came for. I should be fair to Martin about one thing, because the show is careful about it, and it is easy to flatten him into a pure villain. The very first abandonment, when Finn was a baby, was not simple carelessness. Martin was fleeing a dangerous island on a raft with the infant, and the island's guardian attacked them, believing they were trying to escape, and Martin, in the version the show gives us, told the baby he would come back, and leapt off to fight the Guardian to protect him, and the Guardian's enormous wave forcibly separated the two of them and swept them apart into the sea. So the original separation was not a father tossing away a baby, it was chaos and a giant wave. But everything Martin does afterward, every choice not to come back, every evasion when Finn finally finds him, that is on him, and the show does not let him off it. A single accident of a wave, and then a lifetime of choosing not to return. And here is where the show does the thing it does better than anyone, where it makes the emotional wound physical. In that same reunion, Finn, desperate, clings to his father to stop him leaving again, grabs onto him, and will not let go. And Finn's arm, which at that point is possessed by a cursed grass sword, is torn away in the struggle. He loses his arm reaching for the father, who is abandoning him a second time. He loses a literal piece of his body, in the exact moment he loses the fantasy of the father he needed. And that torn arm, that grass-cursed wound, becomes the seed of one of the show's longest arcs, because out of the lost grass arm eventually grows Fern, a twisted grass copy of Finn himself, a walking piece of Finn's own trauma, given a face and a life, and, eventually, a tragedy of its own. That thread was planted seasons in advance, which is the kind of thing that makes this show reward the patient viewer. Long before the arm was lost, in the episode that first introduced the grass sword, there is a dream sequence where Finn watches grass creep across his entire body until he blows away into nothing. Years before Fern existed as a character, the show drew you the image of Finn being consumed by grass and scattered to the wind. And Fern grows, at the very end, on the spot where the treehouse once stood, the same ground that fans have traced back to yet another past life of Finn, a figure who is said to have died in that very place. The show keeps burying Finn in the same soil across 1,000 years, which is either the most elaborate piece of foreshadowing in the series, or its saddest idea about how a person keeps repeating himself, and it is probably both. The lesson in Finn's story with his father is one of the most useful hard truths the show ever handed a child, and I mean useful in the practical, load-bearing sense. You cannot force a parent to be the parent you needed. Finn does everything right by the logic of the stories he grew up on. He is brave, he is persistent, he refuses to give up, he tracks down the missing father against all odds, and in a normal children's story, that effort would be rewarded with love. Here it is rewarded with nothing, with a shrug and a torn-off arm. Because the show knows something truer than the stories, which is that a parent's absence is about the parent, not the child. And no amount of the child being good or brave or worthy can reach into a broken adult and install the love that was never there. Finn does not fix Martin. Nobody can fix Martin. What Finn eventually has to do, and this is the actual growing up, is grieve the father he wanted, let the real one go, and become a whole person anyway, without the missing piece ever being returned. He does not get the arm back either, not the original one. He learns to live one-armed, and then with a new arm, changed, and that is the point. You do not get the lost thing back. You get to find out you can live without it. For a show aimed at children, that is an almost impossibly grown-up thing to say, and it said it plainly, to kids, and trusted them to be able to hear it. Standing next to Finn through all of it, of course, is Jake. And Jake is the one I did not expect to break my heart when I first watched, because he spends most of the show being the comic relief. Jake is a magical dog who can stretch and shrink and reshape his body into anything he wants, and for a long time he is the show's engine of fun, the laid-back, snack-loving, wisecracking best friend who has a solution for everything and a song for most of it. He is voiced by John DiMaggio, whose voice you already know even if you do not know the name, because he is Bender from Futurama. And DiMaggio is one of the very few things that survived intact from the original 2007 pilot short into the finished series. Almost the entire rest of the cast was replaced between the pilot and the show. Jake was always Jake. DiMaggio has talked about how voicing Jake feels natural and unforced to him, and you can hear that ease in every line, the sense of an actor completely at home. There is a persistent myth I want to knock down while we are here, because it circulates as fact and it is not. People say Jake's voice or character was based on a Bill Cosby impression. There is no real source for that, and you should not repeat it. What is actually documented is that Jake's character, His loose, philosophical, live and let live vibe was modeled on Bill Murray's character in the old summer camp comedy Meatballs. So the wisdom of Jake, such as it is, comes down from a 1970s Bill Murray counselor telling kids that it just does not matter, which honestly tracks. Jake's origins got quietly rebuilt over the course of the series, and it is worth knowing because it is a good example of the show layering new depth onto a character who started as a joke. Originally, Jake was just the son of an ordinary dog and human detective couple, Joshua and Margaret, with a brother named Jermaine. But later seasons complicate it. In an episode about Joshua and Margaret, we learn that Jake's father Joshua was once bitten by a shape-shifting demon, and the demon's name, and people get this wrong all the time, is Warren Ampersand, not Ambrose, ampersand, like the and symbol. Jake was born from a growth, a boil, on Joshua's head after that bite. And a later episode, Jake the Star Child, reveals that Jake's stretching powers came from Warren, from that demon bloodline, not from being an ordinary magic dog. So the goofy, stretchy dog turns out to have a strange, half-demonic cosmic heritage that he mostly could not care less about, which is very Jake. He is told he is descended from a reality-warping shapeshifter, and his reaction is basically a shrug and a snack. Jake also has a family of his own, which the show treats with a lovely offhand normalcy. He and Lady Rainicorn, a rainbow-colored creature who is his partner, have 5 children together, 5 hybrid pups, and the show just lets Jake be a dad, imperfectly, distractedly, but really. And Lady Rainicorn is worth a note of her own, because she only ever speaks Korean, real actual Korean, largely left untranslated on purpose, voiced by Nikki Yang, who also voices Bimo. The choice to have a major character speak an untranslated real language, so that much of the audience shares Finn's position of loving someone he cannot fully understand, is exactly the kind of thing this show did without ever making a fuss about it. But the reason Jake matters to a video about life lessons is the reason he matters to me, and it is about mortality, and it takes the full length of the series and its epilogue to arrive. Jake, being a magic dog, ages faster than Finn. This sits in the background of the whole show, the fact that the best friend is on a shorter clock, that a boy and his dog are, by the cruel arithmetic of dogs, never going to reach the end together. And the show finally pays this off after the finale, in a Distant Lands special called Together Again, and I will not spoil the shape of it too much, but the premise is that both Finn and Jake are dead. Jake has died of old age, as dogs do, and the special is about the trip through the afterlife, the dead worlds, as they try to find each other again. It is a full, unhurried meditation on the fact that nothing lasts forever, that even the truest friendship in the world ends, that the dog dies, that you will lose the one who made everything an adventure, and that the losing is not a flaw in the friendship, but the price of having had it. What I love about the way the show handles Jake and death is that it never lets him become morbid about it. He is, if anything, the character least afraid of dying, because he is the character most fully alive while alive. And the single most quoted piece of wisdom in the entire series comes out of his mouth, early on, in a first season episode, and it is so simple that it took me years to realize how much weight it carries. Jake tells Finn that sucking at something is the first step towards being sorta good at something. That is the whole thing. That is the entire philosophy of a life spent trying. Folded into a sentence a dog says to a boy who is frustrated that he is not good at magic yet. Sucking at something is the first step towards being sorta good at something. It is permission to be bad at the beginning. It is the reason to keep going when you are humiliated by your own incompetence. And it comes from the character who ages the fastest, dies the soonest, and worries about it the least. Which is not a coincidence. The one with the least time is the one most at peace with beginning badly, because he understands that the trying is the living, and the living is the point, and none of it was ever going to last anyway. The lesson in Jake is acceptance, and it is the counterweight to everything heavy in the show. Finn's arc is about grieving what you cannot get back. Bubblegum's is about the weight of responsibility. Simon's is about loss you cannot stop. And Jake, the comic relief, the snack-loving dog, is the one who holds the answer to all of them, which is not a trick to avoid the loss, but a way of being inside a life that you know is temporary, without letting the temporariness poison it. He knows the adventure ends. He knows he ends. and he spends the whole thing delighted anyway, making sandwiches, having pups, stretching himself into silly shapes to make his brother laugh. When people say Adventure Time taught them how to feel, they usually mean the sad episodes, the dementia and the grief. But I think the deepest lesson in the show is the one the happy character was demonstrating the whole time, quietly, in the background, one snack at a time. You are going to lose all of it. Be delighted anyway. That is not denial. Coming from Jake, who knew exactly what was coming, it is the bravest thing in the series. Now we have to talk about the dark at the bottom of the show. The things that are actually trying to end the world, because you cannot understand what Adventure Time is about without understanding what it is afraid of. And the first great fear has a face, and the face belongs to the Lich. The Lich is the show's ultimate villain for most of its run. An undead force of pure death and entropy. A green-skinned skeletal horror whose entire purpose is the extinction of all life. He is not evil in the small, petty way the Ice King was ever a threat. He is evil the way heat death is evil, the desire for everything to stop, to be still, to be nothing. And he is voiced, in a piece of casting so right it is almost funny, by Ron Perlman, the growling voice of Hellboy, who came back to the role years later for the specials. When the ultimate embodiment of death speaks in this candy-colored children's show, it speaks with the voice of Hellboy, and it works completely. The word Lich itself carries the show's fascination with buried things, and it is worth pausing on because it is a real word with a real grave history. Lich comes from Old English, from a word that literally means corpse. It survives in modern English in a handful of quiet places, most hauntingly in the word Lichgate, the name for the roofed gateway at the entrance to an old churchyard, the covered spot where, in centuries past, coffins were set down to rest and wait before burial. So, the name of the show's death god is, at its root, just the plain old word for a dead body. The same word carved into the architecture of English graveyards. The creature entered fantasy through Dungeons and Dragons in the 1970s, and the show's writers, who were steeped in that stuff, knew exactly what they were reaching for. They named their entropy after the oldest word we have for the thing under the ground. The Lich's origin is deliberately, pointedly contradictory, and I think that contradiction is one of the smartest things the show ever did. On the one hand, the Lich is tied to a catalyst comet, a cosmic object that arrives on Earth across enormous spans of time, and his soul is said to have come in on one of those comets millions of years ago. On the other hand, his physical body is said to have emerged from mutagenic waste at the very end of the Mushroom War, born out of the nuclear ruin. The show gives you both, and never fully reconciles them, and it does this on purpose, because death does not have a tidy single origin story, because death is both older than the planet and freshly made by every catastrophe. And here is the piece that ties it back to Finn and makes the whole cosmology click into place. Finn is, in the show's mythology, connected to that same comet, the same cosmic cycle. He is understood as a good incarnation of the force that arrives on the comet, and the Lich as the purely evil incarnation of it. The hero and the death god are two faces of the same arriving thing, life and its ending stamped from one die. The show is saying, in its strange candy language, that the will to live and the will to end are not opposites imported from outside. They came in together, on the same rock. But my favorite piece of the Lich, and one of the best facts in the whole series, is not about his origin at all. It is about a snail. If you have watched much of the show, you may have noticed a small, friendly snail that appears hidden somewhere in the background of nearly every single episode, waving cheerfully at the camera, a beloved little where-is-he game for attentive fans, a tiny recurring wink. It shows up in almost every episode, tucked into a corner, waving. And that snail is not a wink. That snail is a vessel for the show's ultimate evil. In an episode where the Lich is imprisoned, sealed away in amber, it is the little waving background snail that the Lich possesses and uses to shatter his own prison from the inside. The friendliest, most innocent recurring gag in the entire series, the cute snail you have been happily spotting in the corners of 100 episodes, is the physical instrument the death god uses to escape and try to end all life. For years, in the background of every sweet adventure, the mechanism of the apocalypse was waving at you, and you waved back. I do not know a better single example of what this show is, of the way it hides its darkest thread inside its most harmless gag, and trusts you to eventually feel the floor drop out. Once you know about the snail, you cannot watch a background of this show the same way again. The Lich is not the last or largest of the show's fears, though. Beyond him, in the finale, is GOLB, and GOLB is a different and stranger kind of dread. If the Lich is death, GOLB is chaos, nonsense, entropy, in the sense of pure disorder, an idiot cosmic force from which meaning itself cannot survive. GOLB was designed by one of the show's longest-serving storyboard artists, Tom Herpich, and the being parallels an old religious idea, the Zoroastrian anti-god, Angra Mainyu, a principle of destructive chaos set against creation. The heroes, in the end, have to go into GOLB, into the bowels of chaos itself, to retrieve the people they love, which is about as pure a mythological structure as you can get, a descent into the underworld to bring someone back. And I will hold most of what happens inside GOLB for later, because it belongs to the finale and to Betty, but I want it on the table now. This idea that the show's final boss is not death but meaninglessness, not an ending but the erasure of the very possibility that anything meant something. There are two more dark threads worth pulling here, because they show how deeply the show hid its horrors in plain sight. One is Gunter, the Ice King's little penguin sidekick, or rather, the most prominent of his many identical penguins. For seasons, Gunter is pure comedy, a mischievous, cooing little bird who wrecks things and steals snacks. And then the show reveals that Gunter is Orgalorg, a cosmic entity called the Breaker of Worlds, compressed and depowered into the harmless form of a penguin after being struck down by a godlike being long ago. The world-ending monster hiding as the pet. It is the snail trick again, the apocalypse wearing the costume of the cutest thing in the room. The other thread is lighter, but tells you something about the show's whole cosmology, which is that its gods are ridiculous on purpose. Death, an actual character who rules over the afterlife, is voiced by Miguel Ferrer, the gravel-voiced actor from RoboCop and Twin Peaks. Prismo, the reality-warping wish-granter who lives outside of time, is voiced by Kumail Nanjiani, and plays as a chilled-out cosmic slacker. And Lumpy Space Princess, the nasal, dramatic, purple cloud of a character, is voiced by Pendleton Ward himself, the creator, hiding inside his own show as its silliest voice. There is even a cosmic omen bird, the cosmic owl, who appears in special prophetic dreams and is treated as a genuine harbinger of fate. And the origin of the cosmic owl, this solemn symbol of destiny and death, is my favorite deflating fact in the whole series. According to a former general manager of the studio, the cosmic owl's design was not inspired by any mythology of death or wisdom or omens at all. It came from the way light reflected off a pipe in the bathroom at Cartoon Network Studios. Someone looked at a glint on the plumbing in the office toilet and saw an owl and drew it, and it became the show's messenger of fate. And I think that is perfect, actually, and not a letdown at all, because it is the whole show in one anecdote. The profound and the ridiculous are the same material here. The god of prophecy is a reflection on a bathroom pipe. The apocalypse is a waving snail. Death has the voice of Hellboy, and destiny came from the plumbing. The lesson, if there is one in all this cosmic machinery, is that Adventure Time never once believed the dark stuff was separate from the silly stuff. They were always made of the same thing, and the show wanted you to laugh at the snail for years, precisely so that the day you understood it would land like a weight. I have been talking about the show as if it were a single mind, and it is time to correct that, because how Adventure Time was actually made is itself one of the great lessons buried in it, and it is not the lesson you would guess. You would assume a show this carefully woven, with threads planted seasons in advance and a cosmology this deep, was the product of a tight writer's room hammering out scripts. It was almost the opposite. Adventure Time is what people in animation call board-driven, and understanding that explains why it feels the way it feels. Here is how it worked. There was a writer's room, but it was tiny, and it did not write scripts. The room, at its core Pendleton Ward, the head of story Kent Osborne, the producer Adam Muto, and a staff writer named Jack Pendarvis, would produce only a short outline for each episode, something like 2 or 3 pages, just the beats. This happens, then this happens, then this happens, with, as one of them put it, not a lot of dialogue in it at all. That outline followed a rigid little skeleton, a fixed shape, 3 beats in the first act, 6 in the second, 3 in the third. And then that bare outline was handed to a pair of storyboard artists, and those storyboard artists wrote essentially all of the actual dialogue, the jokes, the timing, the staging, the feeling, as they drew the episode. The people who wrote the words Finn and Jake say were, for the most part, the same people drawing them. The dialogue was born out of the drawing, not the other way around. Ward did not invent this system out of nowhere. He modeled the whole approach on The Marvelous Misadventures of Flapjack, the earlier Cartoon Network show he had worked on before Adventure Time, where the storyboard artists wrote their own episodes, and he carried that method over deliberately. And it explains almost everything strange and good about how Adventure Time feels. It is why the show can swerve so wildly in tone, why one 11-minute episode is a fart joke, and the next is a meditation on dementia, because you are not hearing one writer's controlled voice. You are hearing dozens of different artists, each pouring their own sensibility into their own episodes. It is why the emotion feels so personal and uneven and alive, because it was personal. The sad episodes are sad because the specific human drawing them was working something out. The logistics of it were genuinely bizarre by television standards. That staff writer, Jack Pendarvis, a novelist, reportedly wrote for the show almost entirely remotely, from Mississippi, joining the room through some kind of chat window from another part of the country, which was an extremely unusual way to make an animated series. By most accounts, each 11-minute episode took the better part of a year to complete, moving through several board teams working in parallel, then weeks more before the network saw it, with the animation itself farmed out to a studio in Seoul that took months. So at any given moment, dozens of episodes were alive at different stages of that pipeline, in different hands, which is part of why the show feels less like a single narrative and more like a living archive that different people kept adding rooms to. And the roster of people who passed through that system reads, now, like a roll call of modern animation, which is the part that still amazes me. This one show was a nursery for an entire generation of creators. Rebecca Sugar, who we have talked about, boarded here first, wrote the show's most devastating songs here, and then left, around the 5th season, to create Steven Universe, becoming Cartoon Network's first woman to solo create a series, and its first openly non-binary solo creator of a show. As far as fans have pieced together, one of her earliest episodes as a storyboard artist was one where she wrote a song, and it earned her an Emmy nomination early on. Patrick McHale, another Adventure Time alum, went off and made Over the Garden Wall, that gorgeous melancholy autumn miniseries that people rewatch every October. Jesse Moynihan, who boarded many of the most cosmology-dense episodes, The Lich, The Deep Mythology, was at the same time self-publishing his own dense, esoteric webcomic about creation myths and aliens and gods, and you can feel that same myth-making mind behind the show's strangest lore. Tom Herpich, who designed GOLB, was among the show's most enduring storyboard artists, by some accounts boarding an episode in nearly every season, and his long partnership with Steve Wolfhard was the backbone of the show's later years. These were not hired hands. They were authors, and the show let them be authors, and then the medium got their whole careers as a result. Because the artists had that much freedom, the show could do experiments that no normally structured cartoon would ever attempt. There is an episode called Food Chain that Cartoon Network handed entirely to the acclaimed Japanese animation director Masaki Yuasa and his studio, letting him write, storyboard, and direct a full episode of an American cartoon in his own wild style. It was, in fact, the first thing his studio, Science Saru, produced under that name. Because Yuasa worked in Japanese, the episode was storyboarded vertically instead of in the show's usual horizontal layout and then translated, and Yuasa reportedly pitched it in person, using large watercolor paintings, and even sang the episode's song himself to demonstrate it. There is another episode, Bad Jubies, made in real, physical stop motion at an outside studio, mixing 2-dimensional and 3-dimensional stop motion, directed by an artist named Kirsten Lepore, whom the showrunner Adam Muto had cold emailed after seeing her student thesis film. It won an Emmy. A mainstream cartoon stopped, mid-run, to become a handmade stop-motion film for 11 minutes, because the culture of the show allowed it. Even the music came from that same homemade, personal place, and it produced what is probably the best small fact in the whole series, about how the show was built. The theme song. That instantly recognizable little tune, the "Come on, grab your friends, we'll go to very distant lands" opening, that is burned into the memory of anyone who watched, was not composed by a hired studio songwriter. Pendleton Ward wrote it himself, and sang it himself, as a rough demo, just a scratch recording to show what he had in mind. And that rough demo, the creator humming his own idea, effectively became the final version you hear on every episode. The most famous 15 seconds of the show is a placeholder that nobody bothered to replace, because it was already exactly right. There is something perfect about that, about the door into this enormous emotional world being, literally, the sound of one guy singing his own idea into a microphone, and everyone agreeing not to fix it. The freedom had a lovely side, and it also, I have to say honestly, had a real cost, because freedom given to human beings always contains the whole range of human beings. Ward himself stepped down as showrunner during the 5th season, and he was clear about why, telling Rolling Stone that as an introvert, the daily grind of managing people was exhausting him and really hurting his quality of life. He did not abandon the show. He stayed on as a storyboard artist and writer and voice actor, still shaping nearly every episode, but he handed the day-to-day to Adam Muto, who ran it from there through the finale and all the specials, and who had been involved all the way back to the original pilot. There was also a dark chapter in the crew's real-world history, which I will state plainly and neutrally because it deserves to be stated and not sensationalized. A storyboard artist named Skylar Page was fired by Cartoon Network in 2014 after a colleague publicly accused him of sexual assault. Much of the staff, including Ward, supported the accuser, and Page later admitted the allegations were true and apologized. A show made by real people carries the real people, all of it, the brilliance and the harm together. The lesson I take from how Adventure Time was made is maybe the most practical one in this whole video, and it is about trust. The show is proof of what happens when you take a group of genuine artists and you hand them the pen instead of the assignment. You do not get consistency. You get wild swings, a fart joke next to a dementia allegory, a stop-motion film in the middle of a normal season. But you also get something no controlled, top-down process can ever manufacture, which is a show that feels like it was made by people who cared, because it was. Because each episode carries the fingerprints of whoever could not stop themselves from putting their whole heart into their 11 minutes. The mess is the meaning. The theme song is a demo nobody fixed. And that turned out to be the most durable way anyone has found to make something people would still be falling asleep to, and waking up thinking about, all these years later. We have circled her a few times now, and it is time to give Betty the space she deserves, because her story is, I think, the most devastating thing in a show full of devastating things, and it is the one that most directly asks what love is worth. Betty Groff was Simon Petrikov's fiancée before the Mushroom War, the woman who ran from him the first time the crown took hold, the woman the Ice King spent 1,000 years kidnapping princesses to unknowingly search for. And Betty does not simply disappear into the past. Late in the show, she claws her way forward through time, into the present, driven by one all-consuming purpose, which is to save Simon, to undo the crown, to get back the man she lost. She dedicates everything she is, her whole formidable mind, to fixing him. In the earlier seasons, she is voiced by Lena Dunham, and later by Felicia Day, and across those appearances, she becomes one of the show's most tragic figures. A woman who has decided that her entire existence will be spent recovering a person the universe took from her. And in the finale, inside GOLB, inside that pit of chaos we talked about, she gets her terrible chance. The crown, it turns out, in that final crisis, will grant its wearer's truest, deepest wish. And Simon is there, and the crown is there, and Betty has spent everything getting to this exact point. And what she wishes for, when the whole of reality is coming apart and GOLB is threatening to end everything, is not to escape, and not to be happy, and not even simply to have Simon back. She wishes for the power to protect Simon at all costs. At all costs. And the crown grants it, in the most literal and merciless way imaginable. To give her the power to protect him, it fuses her with GOLB itself, with the god of chaos, merging her into a single golden entity that fandom and canon call GOLBetty, and in doing so it saves Simon, it strips the curse from him, and returns him to being a human man, and it takes Betty away completely. She gets her wish, Simon is cured, and the price of the wish is Betty herself, erased into a cosmic being, gone, leaving the empty crown behind on the ground. I want to be careful and precise about this, because it is easy to soften, and it should not be softened. This is not a heroic death with a hug at the end. Betty is not killed in a way that lets everyone grieve her cleanly. She is dissolved into something that is no longer her, an erasure of self, and Simon, made human again, is left standing in the wreckage, having gotten back his own mind at the cost of the woman who gave it back to him. He did not ask for that trade. He would never have chosen it. He wakes up cured and alone, and the person who cured him did it by ceasing to exist as a person. That is the wish. That is what she spent everything to buy him, and he has to live knowing the currency was her. And then the show does the cruelest and most honest thing, the thing that separates it from almost every other story that would tell you love conquers all. It refuses to give Betty back. In the aftermath, there is a wish-granting being, Prismo, the one we mentioned, who lives outside of time and can theoretically conjure nearly anything. And Simon, understandably, wants Prismo to bring Betty back, and Prismo cannot. What Prismo produces when asked to retrieve her is a joke, a wastebasket, the same empty gag he offers another character who asks him to return a long-dead wife. The show establishes, flatly, that some things do not come back, that not every loss has a workaround, that not every love has a rescue, that you can be the wishmaster of the cosmos and still be unable to undo the particular shape of a particular grief. Betty is gone. The crown that ruined Simon's life is, in the end, the thing that also saves it, and the woman is the price, and the price is not refundable. If the show had ended there, it would have been almost too bleak to bear, and I think the crew knew that, because they did not end Simon's story there. His grief over Betty, the specific unbearable weight of being cured at her expense, is left raw at the finale, and is only really addressed years later, in the spin-off Fiona and Cake, which finally gives Simon a path toward something like closure, toward learning how to carry a loss that cannot be reversed. The show was willing to let him be broken for a long time first. It did not rush him to healing, because it understood that some griefs take years, that closure is not a thing you get in the same episode as the loss, and that pretending otherwise would be a lie to everyone in the audience who has actually lost someone. The lesson in Betty is the darkest one in this whole video, and I am not going to pretend it into something comfortable, because the show did not. Betty is what happens when love becomes total, when it stops being one part of a life and becomes the entire purpose of a life. And the show does not simply condemn that, because there is something magnificent and holy in her devotion, in a person who would give literally everything, herself, her existence, to protect the one she loves. But it does not celebrate it either. It shows you the cost with unflinching clarity. She saved him, and she lost herself, and he did not want to be saved that way, and it cannot be undone. Love that gives up everything is not a fairy tale in this show. It is a real and terrible thing that real and desperate people sometimes choose, and the choosing is both the most beautiful and the most frightening thing a person can do. The show lets it be both. It does not resolve the contradiction, because the contradiction is true. Sometimes the most loving thing a person can do is also the thing that destroys them, and no wise cosmic being, with all the power in the universe, can make that not have happened. After all that wait, the show hands its final comfort to its smallest character, and I love it for that. BMO is a little living video game console, a small green machine with arms and legs and a screen for a face. And BMO is, in a lot of ways, the pure heart of the show, the one character who is simply, uncomplicatedly full of joy and play and imagination. The name is a small joke that is also a small philosophy. BMO is written like the letters BMO, but it is pronounced BMO, and it is short, the creators have said, for be more. Be more. A tiny robot named after an instruction to become more than you are. And BMO's identity is one of the ways the show quietly did something ahead of its time, because the creators have described BMO as genderless, and across the series, different characters refer to BMO as he and as she interchangeably, and the show never once treats this as a problem to be solved or a question to be answered. BMO simply is, fluid and whole, and everyone around just loves BMO and moves on. For a children's show made across the 2010s, That easy, unremarked acceptance was its own quiet act. BMO is also, it turns out, the character who endures. Because the show does not end with Finn and Jake. It ends by leaping 1,000 years into the future, past the deaths of nearly everyone we have followed, to show us a new pair of adventurers, two figures named Shermie and Beth, echoing Finn and Jake in a world that has moved on without them. And the one who tells them the old legend, the one still around after all those centuries, the king of Ooo in that far future, is BMO. The little game console outlives the boy and the dog and the vampire and the candy queen, and becomes the keeper of the whole story, the one who remembers and passes it on. The most childlike character becomes the eternal narrator. And the point of that leap, the reason the show ends by handing the adventure to strangers, is the thesis the whole thing has been building toward, which is that Adventure Time was never the name of a period that ends. It is a state of being that recurs. Finn and Jake were one turn of a wheel that keeps turning. Shermie and Beth are the next. The story does not conclude, it cycles, and that is meant as a comfort, not a diminishment, because it means the specific people end, but the thing they were part of does not. And of course the show says all of this, finally, in a song, because it always says the truest things in songs. The last real song of the series is called Time Adventure, and the title is a small perfect trick, because Time Adventure is just Adventure Time, with the two words swapped, an anagram of the show's own name, saved for the very end. It was written by Rebecca Sugar, who came back one last time to give the show its final piece of music, her second and last song for the series after everything else she had written, and she debuted at Comic-Con in 2018, in what fans took as a nod to the showrunner, Adam Muto. In the finale, BMO sings it first, to comfort everyone facing the possibility of the end of everything. And then, one by one, the whole cast joins in. And the lyric does the strangest, most consoling thing. It moves through tenses. It talks about this moment as something that is happening, and has happened, and will happen again, and again, and again. Will happen, happening, happened. It refuses to let the beautiful shared moment sit only in the past where loss can reach it. It scatters the moment across all of time at once, so that a thing you did together is not gone when it is over, because in the strange grammar of the song it is always also still happening and about to happen. It is a lullaby against mortality itself, sung by a video game, to a room full of people who are afraid to die, and it is, I think, the single kindest idea the show ever offered. Not that nothing ends, everything ends, but that ending is not the same as never having been, and a moment, once it truly happened, is in some sense permanent precisely because it happened, fixed forever in the part of time that already occurred. There is one more song, the very last sound of the whole series, and its backstory is my favorite kind of Adventure Time fact, the kind where something enormous turns out to have humble, accidental origins. The gentle song that plays over the end of the finale, the soft Come Along With Me tune that gave the finale its name, is called Island Song, and it was not written for the show at all. It is a repurposed indie Christmas song. A musician named Ashley Erickson, from a band called Lake, had an existing track called Christmas Island, and she reworked it into the show's closing theme, and the finale even takes its title, Come Along With Me, straight from that song's lyric. So the phrase that names the ending of Adventure Time, the words the whole finale is built around, come from a small independent Christmas song by a band most people have never heard of. The door out of this world, like the door into it, that Ward demo we talked about, is a modest, homemade, almost accidental thing that just happened to be exactly right. Even the hero's handbook has a hidden real-world root that doubles as the show's mission statement. Early in the series, Finn and Jake quest for a book called the Enchiridion, the hero's manual. And the Enchiridion is a real book. It is the handbook of the ancient Greek Stoic philosopher Epictetus, compiled around the 2nd century, and the word itself is just Greek for handbook or manual. The real Enchiridion is a short guide to living well, and one of its central teachings is about not tormenting yourself over the things you have lost, about accepting that you do not truly own the people and things in your life, you only get to hold them for a while. Which means the fictional hero's handbook these characters chase is named after a 2,000-year-old real book about how to make peace with impermanence, the exact lesson the whole show spends 10 seasons teaching. Somebody on that crew knew precisely what they were doing. And I have to give one small character his moment before we close, because he is my favorite example of the show's generosity. There is an episode built around a horse named James Baxter, a horse who does a trick, balancing on a beach ball, purely to make people feel better, whose entire purpose is bringing joy to strangers. And James Baxter the horse is named after, and voiced by, a real man, a legendary Disney animator named James Baxter, one of the artists behind the fluid, beloved character animation Disney is famous for. The horse is animated more smoothly and beautifully than everything else on screen, on purpose, as a tribute to the real animator's genius, and as fans tell it, the whole episode grew out of the crew's admiration for a talk the real James Baxter once gave. A show made by former art students turned one of their heroes into a horse, whose only job is to make people happy, and animated him with more love than anything around him. That is Adventure Time in one gesture. It takes the people and things it loves, and it folds them into the world, gratefully, playfully, and it lets them go on being loved there. It is worth stepping back, before we drift off entirely, to take the measure of what this odd little show actually became, because the scale of it is part of the lesson too. Adventure Time premiered on Cartoon Network in the spring of 2010 and ran until the autumn of 2018. 10 seasons, 283 episodes, most of them only 11 minutes long, aired in pairs. It grew out of a 7-minute pilot short that Nickelodeon reportedly passed on, deeming it too weird, a short that only survived because it leaked online and was watched by a huge audience before any network would touch it. The internet saved it. Not an executive, not a focus group. A pile of ordinary people watching a strange little cartoon over and over until it could not be ignored. And from that unwanted beginning it went on to win around 8 Primetime Emmy Awards and a Peabody, the award usually reserved for serious journalism and prestige drama, given to a show about a boy and a magic dog. It was distributed in something like 194 countries. Its comic book series ran for years and became a bestseller. At its peak, a single episode drew millions of viewers in a night. I want to be honest about the records, because the show does not need to be inflated to be remarkable, and this channel has been burned by tidy exaggerations before. Adventure Time was not the longest-running Cartoon Network series. By the time it ended, it was around the 4th longest, behind older warhorses like Ed, Edd and Eddy, and the Powerpuff Girls, and the Ben 10 franchise. And it did not sweep every Emmy category it entered, and its finale, when it was finally nominated in the Big Animated Program category, did not actually win it. But none of that dims the achievement, and in a way it sharpens it, because what Adventure Time did was never about being the biggest or the most awarded, it was about being the most sincere. It was the show that treated an 11-minute cartoon slot as a place where you could put a dementia allegory, a meditation on impermanence, a love story 2 women could not say out loud, a boy learning that his father would never love him back, and trust an audience of children and the adults watching beside them to be able to hold it. And it opened a door. The people who made it went out and made much of the animation that came after it, Steven Universe and Over the Garden Wall and more, and the emotional permission that Adventure Time won, the right of a kid's cartoon to be genuinely sad, strange, grown up about grief and love and identity, became the ground that a whole generation of shows was built on. It kept going after its own ending too, with the Distant Land specials and then the Fiona and Cake series, still finding new corners of these people's lives to sit with. The thing that Nickelodeon called too weird turned out to be the thing that changed what the medium was allowed to feel. The lesson in that arc, the whole outside story of the show, is maybe the simplest and most encouraging one of the whole night. The unwanted, weird, sincere thing, made by people who cared more than the format seemed to ask for, is very often the thing that lasts. Not the polished thing, not the safe thing, not the thing built by committee to offend no one and move no one. The theme song was a demo nobody fixed. The apocalypse was a defrosted office worker. The kiss was a storyboard artist writing "come on" in a margin. Over and over, the parts of Adventure Time that endure are the parts where somebody cared too much to do the ordinary thing. That is the pattern under all of it, and it is a pattern you can carry out of here and use, tomorrow, on whatever weird, sincere thing you have been afraid to make. So here we are, near the end, and if you are still awake, I hope some of this has settled over you the way it was meant to, slow and warm and a little sad, in a way that is somehow comforting rather than heavy. Because that is the strange gift of Adventure Time, and the reason people keep coming back to it long after they have grown out of the age it was supposedly made for. It found a way to talk about the hardest things there are, losing your mind, losing your parents, losing the people you love, the certainty that all of it ends, and it managed to make those things feel not like a warning but like company. You are not alone in knowing that everything is temporary. A boy and a dog and a vampire and a candy queen and a little green robot knew it too, and they went on adventures anyway, and they loved each other anyway, and the show softly insisted that the knowing does not have to poison the loving. If anything, it is what makes the loving matter. I think that is why it works so well at this hour, in the dark, on the edge of sleep. The lessons of this show are not the loud kind. They do not lecture. They are the kind of thing you can only really hear when your guard is down, when you are tired enough to stop defending yourself against them. Love someone all the way through the forgetting. Say the true thing, even in the margin, even if they cut it somewhere else. You cannot force a person to be who you needed them to be, and you do not get the lost thing back, but you can find out you are able to live without it. Cruelty is usually just pain that was never healed, and the moments that actually happen between you and the people you love are not erased when they end, because they happened, and having happened is its own kind of forever. That is the whole show, whispered. It buried a nuclear war under candy, and then spent 10 years teaching children, and the adults hiding behind them, how to make peace with impermanence, which is the one lesson every single person eventually needs, and almost nobody gets taught gently. Ooo is still down there, in the ground under all our feet, the ruined and rebuilt version of our own world, a rat in a broken television, and a candy kingdom in the crater. And somewhere in the far future of it, a little robot who was named after the words "Be More" is still telling the old story to whoever will listen, still insisting that it will happen, and is happening, and happened, and will happen again. There are worse things to fall asleep to than that, so let it stay with you. Let the treehouse and the axe bass and the man who forgot his own name and the 2 words in the margin drift through whatever you dream tonight, and know that the sadness under all of it was never meant to hurt you. It was meant to keep you company, and to remind you, softly, to go be delighted anyway, while there is still time, because the time is the whole adventure. Thank you for spending these hours here with me. It genuinely means a lot that you choose these to fall asleep to, and I do not take it for granted. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.